Hey crew, it's Pitt and I'm back with some more Esoterica. Today we are diving back into the works of Mrs. Helena Blavatsky. This is The Secret Doctrine. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but some people seem to find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. A particular note again today is almost certainly going to be the Infinite Integration playlist, where I teach people how to do magic responsibly. With that being said, let us dive in and continue our exploration of the Secret Doctrine with Stanza 6. At the fourth round, or revolution of life and being around the seven smaller wheels, the sons are told to create their images, 1/3 refuses, 2/3 obey. The full meaning of this sloka can be fully comprehended only after reading the detailed additional explanations in the Anthropogenesis and its commentaries in Book 2. Between this sloka and the last, sloka 4, in this same stanza, extend long ages, and there now gleams the dawn and sunrise of another eon. The drama enacted on our planet is at the beginning of its fourth act, but for a clearer comprehension of the whole play, the reader will have to turn back before he can proceed onward. For this verse belongs to the general cosmogony given in the archaic volumes, whereas Book 2 will give a detailed account of the creation, or rather the formation, of the first human beings, followed by the second humanity, and then by the third, or as they are called, the first, second, and third root races. As the solid earth began by being a ball of liquid fire, of fiery dust, and its protoplasmic phantom, so did man. Once again, we are going to point out that no men were here to record this. This is speculation, right? This is the exact same kind of speculation that you find in the Holy Bible, right? When we talk about the fall of the angels, this is probably the source for that. That which was meant by qualification, the fourth, is explained as the fourth round only on the authority of the commentaries. It can equally mean fourth eternity as fourth round, or even the fourth or globe. For, as will repeatedly be shown, it is the fourth sphere on the fourth or lowest plane of material life, and it so happens that we are in the fourth round, at the middle point of which the perfect equilibrium between spirit and matter had to take place. We are going to pop out this footnote. It was, as we shall see, at this period, during the highest point of civilization, that knowledge, as also of human intellectuality of the fourth Atlantean race, that, owing to the final crisis of physiologico-spiritual adjustment of the races, humanity branched off into its two diametrically opposite paths, the right and the left-handed paths of knowledge, or of vidya. Thus were the germs of the white and black magic sown in those days. The seeds lay latent for some time to sprout only during the early period of the fifth R race. Right, now, once again, we want to point out that this is all speculation. Right? She says here that it is pointed out again and again. Yeah, okay, you keep pointing it out, but that does not make it true. Right? I believe in an Atlantean society. I believe in the fall. I have the 12,000 year disaster cycle, and we did Cretaceous and Timaeus, where we talked about that, right? But it is all speculation until we find an actual civilization that dates from that period and accords with what was recorded from Plato, which is not the Eye of the Sahara. Until that happens, we are all speculating, right? You can speculate that this is the fourth round. That is pure speculation, right? I speculate things, they speculate things. They don't seem to point it out, right? This is intimating that there is some knowledge that we don't have. And maybe so. Maybe we will find the lost records of Tehote. Or maybe we will find some Babylonian tablet somewhere that explains in more detail with firmer substantiability that this is true. But as of now, we do not have that, right? We can speculate all that we want that this is the fourth Atlantean race, or that this is the fourth round, or whatever. But it is going to be speculation. It does not matter how many times you say it. It doesn't make it true. I mean, and I believe parts of this, but I don't want to make it seem as though this is incontrovertible fact, right? We do not know that. Right, to say that this is the fourth round and that's the middle point, that assumes that you know the end point, which, I mean, if you take your funny math that you just pull out of your ass and you can say that this is the midpoint because you want it to be, but we don't know when the end point is. It doesn't matter if you've had a spiritual experience that allowed you to see it. You don't know when it is. And so, once again, it's speculation. Says the commentary explaining the verse. The holy youths, the gods, refuse to multiply and create species after their likeness, after their kind. They are not fit forms, rupas, for us. They have to grow. They refuse to enter the kahayas, shadows or images, of their inferiors. Thus, had selfish feeling prevailed from the beginning, even among the gods, and they fell under the eye of the karmic lepikas. They had to suffer for it in later births. How the punishment reached the gods will be seen in the second volume. Stanza 6 continued. 6. The curse is pronounced. They will be born in the fourth race, suffer and cause suffering. This is the first war. It is a universal tradition that, before the physiological fall, propagation of one's kind, whether human or animal, took place through the will of the creators or of their progeny. Not necessarily, right? Universal doesn't... Like, the initial creation, you can make this argument for. But the people who were after the initial creation, no, right? There are traditions that do not hold that. The Native American traditions, for instance. Some traditions do hold that, and you can go with that, but most of the ones that do hold that are based upon speculation, right? Such as this work, right? This is saying that the angels were created in the third round, and that they rebelled, and some of them came down, and they refused to breed, right? That they were to reproduce by divine will is speculation, right? That I believe that we were all created from divine will, that initial creation was divine will, but not necessarily that any of the later creation is. Like, when it's Adam and Eve were created, that was by divine will, right? Let's take for granted that that's a true story and not just an amalgamation. They were created by divine will, and what happened? They went out and bumped uglies and created children. They didn't say, oh, I want to have a kid, right? The intermingling, according to that particular tradition, did not happen for a couple of thousand years. And so we need to keep that in mind as we read this. This is, again, speculation. It was the fall of the spirit into generation, not the fall of mortal man. It has already been stated that, to become a self-conscious spirit, the latter must pass through every cycle of being, culminating in its highest point on earth in man. And again, that is speculation. I speculate differently, right? I believe that you do pass through these things, but must is a big word. And to assume that you know that because you speculate, that is, once again, a little bit of a fallacy, right? It is entirely possible. You can speculate all that you want. But to say that the highest point on earth is man, we don't know that either, right? We assume that because we are that, right? It is entirely possible that when we pass, we go into the sixth plane of existence, which is a higher state, or the seventh plane, which is a higher state. Or we could return to the lower state. We don't know how those mechanics work. We will not know how those mechanics work until we get there. Anything that we say is speculation. Right, to assume is making an ass of someone, but it ain't me. Spirit, per se, is an unconscious negative abstraction. Its purity is inherent, not acquired by merit. Hence, as already shown, to become the highest Dayan Kohan, it is necessary for each ego to attain to full self-consciousness as a human. And again, we do not know that. It should be a goal. I fully believe that. But we don't know that. An example, conscious being, which is synthesized for us in man. Like, I really want everybody to come to the knowledge that I have, or whatever path leads you where you need to go. But to assume that everybody has to have this one piece of knowledge, that's a bit of a stretch. Like, there are many paths out there. The Jewish Kabbalists arguing that no spirit could belong to the divine hierarchy unless Ruach, spirit, was united to Nefesh, living soul, only repeat the Eastern esoteric teaching. A Dhyani has to be an Atma Buddhi. Once the Buddhi Manas breaks loose from its immortal Atma, of which it, Buddhi, is the vehicle, Atman passes into non-being, which is absolute being. This means that the purely nirvanic state is a passage of spirit back to the ideal abstraction of beingness, which has no relation to the plane on which our universe is accomplishing its cycle. The cuss is pronounced does not mean, in this instance, that any personal being, God, or superior spirit pronounced it, but simply that the cause which could but create bad results had been generated, and that the effects of a karmic cause would lead the beings that counteracted the laws of nature, and thus impeded her legitimate progress, only to bad incarnations, hence to suffering. And this, to me, is victim mentality, right? I do not believe that this existence is a curse. I do not believe that the trials that we go through is a curse. I do not believe that the lessons that we learn are a curse. This is a mindset. To believe that is a mindset. To believe that you having to have a bad experience is a curse is a victim mentality mindset. Bad things happen. You are meant to grow from them, to learn from them, to do better from them. Whether that is your bad things or someone else's bad things or any bad things, right? You are meant to learn something from them. That's not a curse. That's a blessing. You get blessed by your hard times because they make you more resilient. And so this is a mindset, and it's one that you should not foster within yourself. There were many wars refers to the several struggles of adjustment, spiritual, cosmical, and astronomical, but chiefly to the mystery of the evolution of man as he is now. Powers, pure essences, that were told to create, is a sentence that relates to a mystery explained, as already said, elsewhere. It is not only one of the most hidden secrets of nature, that of generation, over whose solution the embryologists have vainly put their heads together, but likewise a divine function that involves that other religious, or rather dogmatic, mystery, the fall of the angels, as it is called. Satan and his rebellious host would thus prove, when the meaning of the allegory is explained, to have refused to create physical man, only to become the direct saviors and creators of divine man. That's putting Satan on level with God. That is funny. The symbolical teaching is more than mystical and religious. It is purely scientific, as will be seen later on. For instead of remaining a mere blind, functioning medium, impelled and guided by fathomless law, the rebellious angel claimed and enforced his right of independent judgment and will, his right of free agency and responsibility, since man and angel are alike under karmic law. We have a footnote for that. Explaining Kabbalistic views, the author of The New Aspects of Life says of the falling angels that, according to the symbolical teaching, spirit, from being simply a functionary agent of God, became volitional in its developed and developing action, and, substituting its own will for the divine desire in its regard, so fell. Hence, the kingdom and reign of spirits and spiritual action, which flow from and are the product of spirit volition, are outside and contrasted with and in good contradiction, to the kingdom of souls and divine action. So far, so good, but what does the author mean by saying, when man was created, he was human in constitution, with human affections, human hopes and aspirations. From this state he fell into the brute and savage. This is diametrically opposite to our Eastern teaching, and even to the Kabbalistic notion so far as we understand it, and to the Bible itself. This looks like corporealism and substantialism coloring positive philosophy, though it is rather hard to feel quite sure of the author's meanings. A fall, however, from the natural into the supernatural and the animal, supernatural meaning the purely spiritual in this case, means what we suggest. And there was a war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not. Neither was their place found any more in heaven, and the dragon was cast out, that old serpent, called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. The Kabbalistic version of the same story is given in the Codex Nazareus, the scripture of the Nazarenes, the real mystic Christians of John the Baptist and initiates of Christos. Bahak Zivo, the father of the genie, is ordered to construct creatures, to create. But as he is ignorant of Orcus, he fails to do so and calls in Fetahil, a still purer spirit, to his aid, who fails still worse. This is a repetition of the failure of the fathers, the lords of light, who fail one after the other. Book 2, Sloka 17. We will now quote from our earlier volumes. Then steps on the stage of creation the Spirit, there is a footnote, on the authority of Irenaeus, of Justin Martyr, and the Codex itself. Dunlap shows that the Nazarenes regarded spirit as a female and evil power in its connection with our earth, and therefore they are incorrect. Just plainly, blatantly incorrect. The spirit is the all-pervading essence of God, which is the electromagnetic harmonics of everything. It is literally every single atom and all of the space between those atoms. Everything in existence is the Holy Spirit. It is not bad. It is not evil. It is not even feminine. Then steps on the stage of creation the spirit of the earth, so-called, or the soul, psyche, which St. James calls devilish, the lower portion of the anima mundi, or astral light. See the close of this sloka. With the Nazarenes and the Gnostics, this spirit was feminine. Thus, the spirit of the earth, perceiving that for Fetahil, the newest man. Alright, we're going to check out this footnote. Fetahil was identical with the host of the Pitras who created man as only a shell. He was, with the Nazarenes, the king of light and the creator, but in this instance, he is the unlucky Prometheus, who fails to get hold of the living fire necessary for the formation of the divine soul, as he is ignorant of the secret name, the ineffable or incommunicable name of the Kabbalist. The newest man, the latest, the splendor was changed, and that for splendor existed, decrease and damage. She awakes Kerab Tanos, which is another footnote. The spirit of matter and concupiscence, Kamarupa minus Manas, mind, who is frantic and without sense and judgment, and says to him, Arise, see the splendor, light of the newest man, Fetahil, has failed to produce or create men. The decrease of the splendor is visible. Rise up, come with thy mother, the Spiritus, and free thee from limits by which thou art held, and those more ample than the whole world. After which follows the union of the frantic and blind matter, guided by the insinuations of the spirit, not the divine breath, but the astral spirit, which, by its double essence, is already tainted with matter. And the offer of the mother being accepted, the Spiritus conceives 7 figures, and the 7 stellars, planets, which represent also the 7 capital sins, the progeny of an astral soul separated from its divine source, spirit, and matter, the blind demon of concupiscence. Seeing this, Fedahil extends his hand towards the abyss of matter and says, "Let the earth exist, just as the abode of the powers has existed." Dipping his hand into the chaos where he condenses, he creates our planet. Let's go ahead and pop out that footnote. Codex Nazareus 2:233. Then the Codex proceeds to tell how Bahak Ziva was separated from the Spiritus and the Genii, or angels, from the rebels. Another footnote. This Manu of the Nazarenes strangely resembled the Hindu Manu, the heavenly man of the Rig Vedas. I think I may be off one, right? Yeah, I messed up. That was supposed to be the Codex Nazareus. The one prior to that was C. Frank's Codex Nazareus. Then Manu, footnote, and there's going to be 5 little tickies. This Manu of the Nazarene strangely resembles the Hindu Manu, the heavenly man of the Rig Vedas. Okay. The greatest, who dwells in the greatest Pharaoh, called Kabarazivo, known also by the name of Nabat Ivar Bar Ifun Ifafun, helm and vine of the food of life. Footnote, I am the true vine, and my father is the husbandman. He, being the third life and commiserating the rebellious and foolish genii, on account of the magnitude of their ambition, says, Lord of the genii, eons, and this is another footnote. With the Gnostics, Christ, as well as Michael, who is identical with him in some respects, was the chief of the eons. Lord of the genii, eons, see what the genii, the rebellious angels, do, and about what they are consulting. Footnote, Codex Nazareus 1:135. They say, let us call for the world, and let us call the powers into existence. The genii are the principes, the sons of light, but thou art the messenger of life. Another footnote. Ibid. And, in order to counteract the influence of these 7 badly disposed principles, the progeny of Spiritus, Kabarzio, the mighty Lord of Splendor, produces 7 other lives, the cardinal virtues, who shine in their own form and light from on high. We'll pop that out. See the cosmogony of Pherecydes. I'm going to point out here that I do not believe this, because I believe that the virtues and the vices are the same thing on a sliding scale, right? Lust and chastity are literally a sliding scale of how you act. And so, if the 7 virtues were, or the 7 vices were created, at the exact same time, these 7 virtues would be created, not later. And not in counteraction, right? We would assume that the positive would be there before the negative. Back to the text. And thus reestablish the balance between good and evil, light and darkness. Did that do that? Like, there is a balance. You are meant to strike it, but you can only strike it if that is true, that there is a coin, right? There is a sliding scale. It is not true if they are 2 completely different things. Here one finds a repetition of the earlier allegorical dual systems, as the Zoroastrian, and detects a germ of dogmatic and dualistic religions of the future. A germ which has grown into such a luxuriant tree in ecclesiastical Christianity. It is already the outline of the 2 supremes, God and Satan, but in the stanzas no such idea exists. These are not the same and are not equal, right? God is so far above this idea that it is not even close, right? God and Satan are not equals. So they're not 2 supremes, right? If there is a Satan, which is highly disputed, then it would be by necessity inferior to the creator of all. Just saying. Most of the Western Christian Kabbalists, preeminently Eliphas Levi, in their desire to reconcile the occult sciences with church dogmas, did their best to make of the astral light only and preeminently the pleroma of the early church fathers, the abode of the host of the fallen angels, of the archons and powers. But the astral light, while only the lower aspect of the absolute, is yet dual. It is the anima mundi, and ought never to be viewed otherwise except for Kabbalistic purposes. The difference which exists between its light and its living fire ought to be ever present in the mind of the seer and the psychic. The higher aspect, without which only creatures of matter from that astral light can be produced, is this living fire, and it is the seventh principle. It is said in Isis Unveiled, in a complete description of it. The astral light, or anima mundi, is dual and bisexual. The intimation there is that it is male and female, when indeed it is neither. The ideal, male part of it is purely divine and spiritual. It is the wisdom. It is spirit or Purusha. While the female portion, the spiritus of the Nazarenes, is tainted in one sense with matter. It is indeed matter, and therefore is evil already. So God created evil, just like everything is evil, right? This cup is evil. The tea inside of it, that's evil. That is matter. It's evil, right? This is again the spirit of negativity. This is again the spirit of victimhood, right? We are here being punished. This is something horrible. It is true that the spirit is both male and female, right? There is male and female in everything. That is the law of genders. It is one of the 8 laws of creation. It is a truth, right? There is masculine and feminine in everything. But the spirit is neither masculine nor feminine. It is both at the same time. That is a little bit of a hard concept for some people to wrap their minds around, but it is a truth, right? It is both light and dark. It is good and evil. It is male and female. Sliding scale, again. The only differentiation is the use to which you put it. If you use it for positive means, that means one thing. If you use it for negative means, that means something else. But it can be used for either. It contains both within it. It is the life principle of every living creature, that I agree with, and furnishes the astral soul, the fluidic perisprit, to men, animals, fowls, and the air, and everything living. Animals have only the latent germ of the highest immortal soul in them. This latter will develop only after a series of countless evolutions, the doctrine of which evolution is contained in the Kabbalistic axiom: a stone becomes a plant a beast a man a spirit, and the spirit a god. We have already several times gone over the theory of spiritual evolution, so I'm not going to hit it here. But this is not entirely out of line with that until you get to the end, right? You return to God, you do not become a god. That is an important distinction. The 7 principles of the Eastern initiates had not been explained when Isis was written, but only the 3 Kabbalistic phases of the semi-exoteric Kabbalah. Footnote: they are found, however, in the Chaldean Book of Numbers. But these contain the description of the mystic natures of the first group of Dayan Kohans in the regimen Ignis, the region and rule or government of Phaya, which group is divided into 3 classes synthesized by the first, which makes 4, or the Tetrarchus. See comments on Stanza 7, Book 1. If one studies the comments attentively, he will find the same progression in the angelic natures, vis-a-vis from the passive down to the active, the last of these beings being as near to the ahamkara element, the region or plane wherein egoship or the feeling of I amness is beginning to be defined, as the first ones are near to the undifferentiated essence. The former are arupa, incorporeal, the latter rupa, corporeal. In Volume 2 of Isis, page 183, the philosophical systems of the Gnostics and the primitive Jewish Christians, the Nazarenes, and the Ebionites are fully considered. We have dealt entirely with Isis, right? Isis Unveiled. It is part of this playlist. It has its own playlist. If you would like to see that be discussed, we have done that. They show the views held in those days outside the circle of Mosaic Jews, about Jehovah. He was identified by all the Gnostics with the evil rather than with the good principle. For them, he was Ilda Baoth, the son of darkness, whose mother, Sophia Achamoth, was the daughter of Sophia, the divine wisdom, the female Holy Ghost of the early Christians, Akasa. There's a footnote here. The astral light stands in the same relation to Akasa and Anima Mundi as Satan stands to the deity. They are one and the same thing seen from two aspects, the spiritual and the psychic. The superethereal, or connecting link between matter and pure spirit, and the physical. For the difference between nous, the higher divine wisdom, and psyche, the lower and terrestrial, St. James, vide Demon est Deus inversus, part 2 of this volume. It is also important to note that this is not entirely out of line with what I talked about in the Bible study, right? The God that the Mosaic was founded upon rewarded death, destruction, and much misery, right? That is plain from the text. We did 161 videos where we read aloud the Bible like we are doing here and discussed it, and it is quite evident by merely reading the book that the God that the Jews were serving was an evil one. Back to the text. While Sophia Achamoth personified the lower astral light or ether, Ilda Baoth, or Jehovah. Footnote, Ilda Baoth is a compound name made up of Ilda, a child, and Baoth, both from the egg, and Baoth, chaos, emptiness, void, or desolation, or the child born in the egg of chaos, like Brahma. Ilda Baoth, or Jehovah, is simply one of the Elohim, the 7 creative spirits, and one of the lower Sephiroth. He produces from himself 7 other gods, stellar spirits, or the lunar ancestors. Footnote, Jehovah's connection with the moon in the Kabbalah is well known to students, for they are all the same. Second footnote. About the Nazarenes, see Isis Volume 2, page 131 and 132. The true followers of the true Christos were all Nazarenes and Christians, and were the opponents of the later Christians. We covered that in some extensive detail. They are all in his own image, the spirits of the face, and the reflections one of the other, and have become darker and more material as they successively receded from their originator. They also inhabit 7 regions, disposed like a ladder, and its rungs slope up and down the scale of spirit and matter. Vide supra, the diagram of the lunar rings of the 7 worlds, where, as in R or any other chain, the upper worlds are spiritual, while the lowest, whether moon, earth, or any planet, is dark with matter. With pagans and Christians, with Hindus and Chaldeans, with the Greeks as with the Roman Catholics, with a slight variation of the text in their interpretations, they were all the genii of the 7 planets, as of the 7 planetary spheres of our septenary chain, of which Earth is the lowest. And once again, I do not believe or agree with that. We have talked about that before, right? We're on the 3rd rock from the sun. That does not make us the lowest. This connects the stellar and lunar spirits with the higher planetary angels and Saptarishis, the 7 rishis of the stars of the Hindus. As subordinate angels, messengers, to these rishis, the emanations, on the descending scale of the former. Such, in the opinion of the philosophical Gnostics, were the god of the archangels, now worshipped by the Christians. The fallen angels, and the legend of the war in heaven, is thus purely pagan in its origin, and comes from India via Persia and Chaldea. The only reference to it in the Christian canon is found in Revelations, as quoted a few pages back. That is true. Right, like, the idea of these angels is not even really that biblical. There are entities, don't get that twisted, but to put them on the level that they are is probably incorrect. I mean, many of them are probably better classified in the 6th realm than the 7th. Thus, Satan, once he ceases to be viewed in the superstitious, dogmatic, unphilosophical spirit of the churches, grows into the grandiose image of one who is made of terrestrial, a divine man, who gave him, throughout the long cycle of Mahakalpa, the law of the spirit of life, and made him free from the sin of ignorance, hence of death. See the section on Satan in part 2. That'll be an interesting one. Stanza 6 continued. 6. The older wheels rotated downward and upward. The mother spawn filled the whole cosmos. We're going to go ahead and pop out that footnote. The reader is reminded that cosmos often means in our stanzas only our own solar system, not the infinite universe. There were battles fought between the creators and the destroyers, and battles fought for space, the seed appearing and reappearing continuously. Another footnote, this is purely astronomical. Here, having finished for the time being with our side issues, which, however they may break the flow of the narrative, are necessary for the elucidation of the whole scheme, the reader must return once more to the cosmogony. The phrase, older wheels, refers to the worlds or globes of our chain as they were during the previous rounds. The present stanza, when explained esoterically, is found embodied entirely in those Kabbalistic works. Therein will be found the very history of the evolution of those countless globes which evolve after a periodical pralaya, rebuild from old material into new forms. The previous globes disintegrate and reappear transformed and perfected for a new phase of life. In the Kabbalah, words are compared to sparks which fly from under the hammer of the great architect. Law, the law which rules all the smaller creators. And once again, I want to point out speculation. We do not know how the earth was done, right? How the formation was. We do not know that this is a correct interpretation of reality. It may be, by all means, but don't take it as gospel. Don't take it as truth. Those things are not the same, but don't take it as truth, right? Take it as a supposition. You can attempt to formulate something that would confirm that, but even then you're probably going to be doing it incorrectly, right? If you're speculating too much on the formation, then you're not speculating enough on what you need to do today. The following comparative diagram shows the identity between the two systems, the Kabbalistic and the Eastern. The three upper are the three higher planes of consciousness, revealed and explained in both schools only to the initiates. The lower ones represented the four lower planes, the lowest being our plane, or the visible universe. And again, I do not agree with that. The 7 planes correspond to the 7 states of consciousness in man. That's a little bit closer to truth. It remains with him to attune the 3 higher states in himself to the 3 higher planes in cosmos. Before he can attempt to attune, he must awaken the 3 seats of life to life and activity. And how many are capable of bringing themselves to even a superficial comprehension of the Atma Vidya, spirit knowledge, or what is called by the Sufis, Rohini? Now, we're going to talk about this. We've talked about the 7 internal chakras, right? Base, sacral, solar plexus, heart, throat, third eye, crown, and the one outside, which is the divine. That would correspond inversely with the planets coming in, right? It's beginning with Uranus and coming back this way. Yeah. No, Neptune. Uranus. Anyway, if you come back this way, we're the 5th in line, right? That would put us on the 5th dimension, which corresponds with my theory of spiritual evolution. And it gives us 3 more going in, right? Including the sun. That would bring us to 8, from 5 to 8. These 3 higher states are going to correspond with everything past the heart in the chakra system, right? The lower ones are related to here, the planetary, right? It is base survival, it is sexual reproduction, it is I need to eat. That is the 3 coming up, right? There are more definitions to those, but those are the bases. Then you get to the heart, which is the holding together of the lower with the upper, and then you get to the upper ones, which is the throat, the third eye, and the crown, which is expressing yourself. It is seeing forward into time and with thought, and it is receiving from the divine. You do have to awaken those. Most people reside from the heart downward. Very few people can get to the throat without help, without intentionality. That is not unintentional. That is something that you do have to awaken, right? You have to draw the energy up, break the block to get to the throat, break the block to get to the third eye, and break the block to get to the crown. Those are all energetic manipulations, right? It is pulling the energy up and breaking the block. It is pulling the energy up and breaking another block. That is not to be done in one sitting. But this is something that you must do for attainment, right? That is where I'm going with that. It is a meditative thing. It is a spiritual thing. And while I cannot say that it is truth, it has worked for me. We have already talked about it before in the Infinite Integration playlist, so we're not going to really dive into the actual mechanics of that yet. We will be coming back to that eventually. All right, back to the text. In section the 7th of this book, in subsection 3, the reader will find a still clearer explanation of the above commentary upon Saptaparna, the man plant. See also the section of that name in part 2. Now here is the explanation of the planes of existence. The first plane is nothing. The second plane is the beginning of formation, right? All the way down to the worst plane, the physical material world. The original will be linked above. You are more than welcome to come back and peruse this at your leisure. I'm not going to try to interpret it. Did we miss... they have footnotes. Oh, this is footnotes to the diagram. We're not going to bother with those. All right. So, see also the section of that name in part 2. Oh, wait. This is... Why are the footnotes above this? The seed appears and disappears continuously. Here, seed stands for the world germ, viewed by science as material particles in a highly attenuated condition, but in occult physics as spiritual particles. An example, supersensuous matter existing in a state of primeval differentiation. There's a footnote. To see and appreciate the difference, the immense gulf that separates terrestrial matter from the finer grades of supersensuous matter, every astronomer, every chemist and physicist ought to be a psychometer, to say the least. He ought to be able to sense for himself that difference in which he now refuses to believe. Mrs. Elizabeth Denton, one of the most learned and also one of the most materialistic and skeptical women of her age, the wife of Professor Denton, the well-known American geologist and author of The Soul of Things, was nevertheless one of the most wonderful psychometers some years ago. This is what she described in one of her experiments with a particle of meteorite placed on her forehead in an envelope. The lady, not being aware of what it contained, said, "What a difference between that which we recognize as matter here and that which seems like matter there. In the one, the elements are so coarse and so angular. I wonder that we can endure it all, much more than we can desire to continue our present relations to it. In the other, all the elements are so refined, they are so free from those great, rough angularities which characterize the elements here, that I can but regard that as by so much the more than this, the real existence." That made no sense. In theogony, every seed is an ethereal organism from which evolves later on a celestial being, a god. And again, you do not become a god. Right. This makes no sense because the angularities, so what? The meteorite came through the atmosphere and burned into a molten shape, which probably smoothed out those angulars, right? It is not that there is not angles in natural creation outside of this plane. Right? That doesn't even make sense. Yes, there are still angles. If you break that meteorite open, I guarantee you that the iron in which it is formed will have angles in it. In the beginning, that which is called mystic phraseology, cosmic desire, evolves into absolute light. Now, light without any shadow would be absolute light. In other words, absolute darkness, as physical science seeks to prove. That shadow appears under the form of primordial matter, allegorized, if one likes, in the shape of the spirit of the creative fire or heat. If, rejecting the poetical form and allegory, science chooses to see in this the primordial fire mist, it is welcome to do so, whether one way or the other, whether Fohat or the famous force of science, nameless, and as difficult of definition as our Fohat himself, that something caused the universe to move with circular motion, as Plato has it, or as the occult teaching expresses it. The central sun causes Fohat to collect primordial dust in the form of balls, to impel them to move in converging lines, and finally to approach each other and aggregate. Book of Dizan. Being scattered in space without order or system, the world germs come into frequent collision until their final aggregation, after which they become wanderers, comets. Then the battles and struggles begin. The older bodies attract the younger, while others repel them. Many perish, devoured by their stronger companions. Those that escape become worlds. This is a somewhat accurate description of the formation. Right? We do not know. Once again, we speculate through science. But this is probably closer to truth than many of the other things that are being said. If you go again to the Thunderbolts Project, which is a different YouTube channel, but it is linked off of my page, you can find it in the recommended channels. They have in their playlist, I don't know which video it is, but they have a video on how they have in a laboratory reproduced the effects that seem to replicate the formation of the planets. They have, through experimentation, caused this particular thing to happen, right? Not necessarily creating comets and worlds, but forming from nothing but base elements the approximation of the material plane in which we are in. Right? They've what seems to be at least a link to the formation of the planets. That is not to say that we can create a planet, but there is a better understanding now of how that is possible through the science that they have used. And it is in line with this, right? That there is an aggregation, and that aggregation will eventually lead to accumulation, and that accumulation will lead to the incorporation. Now, how the specifics on that actually work are still a little bit fuzzy. Right? Now we will check out the footnote to this. Those that escape become worlds. When carefully analyzed and reflected upon, this will be found as scientific as science can make it, even at our late period. And that's pretty much what I was trying to get to. We have been assured that there exist several modern works of speculative fancy upon such struggles for life inside real heaven, especially in the German language. We rejoice to hear it, for ours is an occult teaching lost in the darkness of archaic ages. We have treated of it fully in Isis Unveiled, and the idea of Darwinian-like evolution, of struggle for life and supremacy, and of the survival of the fittest among the host above as the host below, runs throughout both the volumes of our earlier work, written in 1876. See index in Isis Unveiled at the words Evolution, Darwin, Kapila, Battle of Life. But the idea was not ours, it is that of antiquity. Even the Puranic writers have ingeniously interwoven allegory with cosmic facts and human events. Any symbologist may discern the astro-cosmical illusion, even though he is unable to grasp the whole meaning. The great wars in heaven in the Puranas, the wars of the Titans in Hesiod and other classical writers, The struggles, also in the Egyptian legend between Osiris and Typhon, and even those in the Scandinavian legends, all refer to the same subject. Northern mythology refers to it as a battle of the flames, the son of Muspel, who fought on the field of Wigrid. All of these relate to heaven and earth, and have a double and often even a triple meaning, and esoteric application to things above as to things below. They relate severally to astronomical, theogonical, and human struggles, to the adjustment of orbs, and the supremacy among nations and tribes. The struggle for existence and the survival of the fittest reigned supreme from the moment that cosmos manifested into being, and could hardly escape the observant eye of the ancient sages. Hence, the incessant fights of Indra, the god of the firmament, with the Asuras, degraded from high gods into cosmic demons, and with Vriti, or Ahi, the battles fought between stars and constellations, between moons and planets, later on incarnated as kings and mortals. Hence, also, the war in heaven of Michael and his host against the dragon, Jupiter, and Lucifer Venus, when a third of the stars of the rebellious host was hurled down into space, and its place was found no more in heaven. As said long ago, this is the basic and fundamental stone of the secret cycles. It shows that the Brahmins and Tanaim speculated on the creation and development of the world quite in a Darwinian way, both anticipating him and his school in the natural selection of species, the survival of the fittest, and transformation. There were old worlds that perished, conquered by the new, etc., etc. Isis Unveiled, Volume 2. The assertion that all the worlds, stars, planets, etc., as soon as the nucleus of primordial substance in the Laya, undifferentiated, state is informed by the free principles of a just, deceased, sidereal body, become first comets and then suns to cool down to inhabitable worlds, is a teaching as old as the Rishis, and is almost certainly incorrect. Right, this is why it is important to make sure that we understand that it is speculation. Right? Even now, we are still speculating, but almost certainly the sun was never a comet. Right? It is literally that simple. But also, Jupiter was probably never a comet, even though it may have been a sun. See the Tycho's model for more on that. And so, to say this is speculating, right? Become first comets and then suns to cool down. So you're telling me that the comet, free-flowing through space, despite gravity and orbits, right, moving through space of its own volition, suddenly becomes semi-static and illuminates. I don't think that comets are going to accumulate enough mass flying through the free-flowing plasma of space to do so. Right? That is speculation, and it is important to note that it is speculation. Thus, the secret books distinctly teach, as we see, an astronomy that would not be rejected even by modern speculation could the latter thoroughly understand its teachings. And again, having a greater knowledge now helps us to differentiate some of the speculation. It is not unreasonable for them to have assumed this back in the day, right? They were working with less knowledge than we have now. And so again, that is something else important to note, right? This was before World War I, shortly after the American Civil War. So science was not nearly as advanced then as it is now. For archaic astronomy and the ancient physical and mathematical sciences expressed views identical with those of modern science, and many of far more momentous import. A struggle for life as a survival of the fittest in the worlds above, as on our planet here below, are distinctly taught. This teaching, however, although it would not be entirely rejected by science, is sure to be repudiated as an integral whole. For it avers that there are only 7 self-born primordial gods emanated from one Trinitarian one. In other words, it means that all the worlds, or sidereal bodies, always on strict analogy, are formed one from the other after the primordial manifestation at the beginning of the Great Age is accomplished. The birth of the celestial bodies in space is compared to a crowd or multitude of pilgrims at the festival of the fires. 7 ascetics appear on the threshold of the temple with 7 lighted sticks of incense. As the light of these, the first row of pilgrims pick their incense sticks. First row of pilgrims light their incense sticks, after which every ascetic being, whirling his stick around his head in space, furnishes the rest with life. Thus, with the heavenly bodies, a Laya center is lighted and awakened into life by the fires of another pilgrim, after which the new center rushes into space and becomes a comet. It is only after losing its velocity and hence its fiery tail that the fiery dragon settles down into quiet and steady life as a regular, respectable citizen of the sidereal family. Therefore, it is said, born in the unfathomable depths of space out of the homogeneous element called the world soul, every nucleus of cosmic matter, suddenly launched into being, begins life under the most hostile circumstances. Through a series of countless ages, it has to conquer for itself a place in the infinitudes. It circles round and round between denser and already fixed bodies, moving by jerks and pulling towards some given point or center that attracts it, trying to avoid, like a ship drawn into a channel dotted with reefs and sunken rocks, other bodies that draw and repel it in turn. Many perish, their mass disintegrating through stronger masses, and when born within a system, chiefly within the insatiable stomachs of various suns, see commentary to stanza 4, those which move slower and are propelled into an elliptic course are doomed to annihilation sooner or later. Others, moving in parabolic curves, generally escape destruction owing to their velocity. That is some fine speculation. Some very critical readers will perhaps imagine that this teaching, as to the commentary stage passed through by all heavenly bodies, is in contradiction with the statements just made as to the moon being the mother of the earth. We also discounted that. They will, perhaps, fancy what intuition is needed to harmonize the two. But no intuition is in truth required. What does science know of comets, their genesis, growth, and ultimate behavior? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. That is not as true today as it was then. And what is so impossible that a Laya center, a lump of cosmic protoplasm, homogeneous and latent, when suddenly animated or fired up, should rush from its bed in space and whirl throughout the abysmal depths in order to strengthen its homogeneous organism by an accumulation and addition of differentiated elements? And why should not such a comet settle in life, live, and become an inhabited globe? The abodes of Fohat are many, it is said. He places his 4 fiery, electropositive, suns in the 4 circles. These circles are the equator, the ecliptic, and the 2 parallels of declination, or the tropics, to preside over the climates of which are placed the 4 mystical entities. Then again, other 7 suns are commissioned to preside over the 7 hot and the 7 cold lokas, the hells of the orthodox Brahmins. At the 2 ends of the Agamata, the earth and its poles, the 7 lokas are called the rings elsewhere, and the circles. The ancients made the polar circles 7 instead of 2, as Europeans do, for Mount Meru, which is the North Pole, is said to have 7 gold and silver steps leading to it. Once again, it is important to note that their time and our time is not the same time, and as of this, they had not made it to the North Pole. The strange statement made in one of the stanzas, the songs of Fohat and his sons were radiant as the noontide sun and the moon combined, and that the 4 suns on the middle 4-fold circle saw their father's songs and heard his solar selenic radiance. It is explained in the commentary in these words. The agitation of the Fohatic forces at the 2 cold ends, north and south poles, of the earth, which resulted in a multicolored radiance at night, have in them several of the properties of akasa, ether, color, and sound as well. That is talking about the northern and southern lights, which are electromagnetic emanations, and you should definitely check out more information on those. Sound is the characteristic of akasa, ether. It generates aya, the property of which is touch, which, by friction, becomes productive of color and light, Vishnu Purana. This is not entirely true. Perhaps the above will be regarded as archaic nonsense, but it will be better comprehended if the reader remembers the aurora borealis and australis, both of which take place at the very centers of terrestrial electric and magnetic forces. That is true. The two poles are said to be the storehouses, the receptacles and liberators at the same time, of cosmic and terrestrial vitality, electricity, from the surplus of which the Earth, had it not been for these two natural safety valves, would have been rent to pieces long ago. At the same time, it is now a theory that has lately become an axiom, that the phenomena of polar lights is accompanied by, and productive of, strong sounds like whistling, hissing, and cracking. That is true. But see Professor Trumholt's works on the aurora borealis and his correspondence regarding this moot question. The aurora borealis and australis do serve an important purpose, right? We are protected in space by the electromagnetic shield around the Earth that is generated from our north and south pole in a toroidal fashion. That is important for many reasons that we have already talked about, right? Existence is a toroid. But what it does is, at the same time, acts as a protector and a distributor. We are receiving energy from the sun and other cosmic sources, but the sun primarily is our main distributor of energy. That energy comes and is diverted around us by this shield. It is a toroid, so it goes out and it comes back and it emanates continuously, right? But it is absorbing as well as emanating. So that energy is absorbed into our planet and distributed through the magma under our feet to the various planes of existence, so to speak. Our volcanic activity can be almost directly linked back to solar activity. Our weather patterns here, this blizzard of 2025 that we just went through here in Louisiana, can be tied back to the sun quite definitively. Not to the absolute, but fairly close. The perturbations on the sun very often equal perturbations in our atmosphere, which very often equal these out-of-place storms. And so this is an important thing to note, that the aurora borealis is electromagnetic. It does produce light and sound. And that sound is an important one. You should definitely check that out. Stanza 6 continued. 7. Make thy calculations, O Lanu. If thou wouldst learn the correct age of thy small wheel chain, its fourth spoke is on Mother Earth. Reach the fourth fruit of the fourth path of knowledge that leads to nirvana, and thou shalt comprehend, for thou shalt see. The small wheel is our chain of spheres, and the fourth spoke is our Earth, the fourth in the chain. It is one of those on which the hot, positive breath of the sun has a direct effect. Footnote. The 7 fundamental transformations of the globes, or heavenly spheres, or rather of their constituent particles of matter, is described as follows. The homogeneous, the aeriform and radiant, gaseous, curd-like, nebulous, atomic, ethereal. But no continued on next page. Beginning of motion, hence of differentiation. Germinal, fiery, differentiated but composed of the germs only of the elements in their earliest states, they having 7 states when completely developed on our Earth. 6. Fourfold, vapory, the future Earth, cold and depending. 7. Cold and depending on the sun for light and life. To calculate its age, however, as the pupil is asked to do in the stanza, is rather difficult, since we are not given the figures of the great Kalpa, and are not allowed to publish those of our small yugas, except as to the approximate duration of these. The older wheels rotated for one eternity and one half of an eternity. That's brilliant. It says, we know that by eternity, the seventh part of 311 trillion 40 billion years, or the age of Brahma, is meant. And again, this number is completely speculative, pulled completely out of thin air for no reason. But what of that? We also know that, to begin with, if we take for our basis the above figures, we have first of all to eliminate from the 100 years of Brahma, or 311 trillion 40 billion years, 2 years. Because that's important. Taken up by the Sandhyas, twilights, which leaves 98, as we have to bring it to the mystical combination 14 times 7. But we have no knowledge at what time precisely the evolution and formation of our little earth began. Therefore it is impossible to calculate its age, unless the time of its birth is given, which the teachers refuse to do because they don't know. At the close of this book and in Book 2, however, some chronological hints will be given. We must remember, moreover, that the law of analogy holds good for the worlds as it does for man, and that as the one deity becomes two, deva, or angel, and two becomes three, or man, etc., etc., so we are taught that the Kurds, world stuff, become wanderers, comets. These become stars, and the stars the centers of vertices, are suns and planets, to put it briefly. See footnote. This cannot be so very unscientific, since Descartes thought also that the planets rotate on their axes because they were once lucid stars, the centers of vortices. That is not a truth, right? Just because someone else speculated on something does not make it a truth. It is important to hold speculations as speculations and not truth. B. There are 4 grades of initiation mentioned in esoteric works, which are known respectively in Sanskrit as Srotapana, Sagardagan, Anagamin, and Arhan, the 4 paths to Nirvana. In this, our 4th round, bearing the same appellations. The Arhan, though he can see the past, the present, and the future, is not yet the highest initiate, for the adept himself, the initiated candidate, becomes Kala, pupil, to a higher initiate. 3 further, higher grades have to be conquered by the Arhan, who would reach the apex of the ladder of Arhatship. There are those who have reached it even in this 5th race of ours, but the faculties necessary for the attainment of these higher grades will be developed in the average ascetic only at the end of this root race, and in the 6th and 7th. Thus there will always be initiates and the profane till the end of this minor manvantara, the present life cycle. The Arhats of the fire mist of the 7th rung are but one remove from the root base of their hierarchy, the highest on earth, and our terrestrial chain. This root base has a name which can only be translated by several compound words into English. The ever-living human banyan, this wondrous being, descended from a high region, they say, in the early part of the 3rd age, before the separation of the sexes of the 3rd race. This 3rd race is sometimes called collectively the sons of passive yoga. In example, it was produced unconsciously by the 2nd race, which, as it was intellectually inactive, is supposed to have been constantly plunged into a kind of blank or abstract contemplation, as required by the conditions of the yoga state. Sorry, this tea has cayenne in it, and it hit the wrong spot in my throat. In the first or earlier portion of the existence of this 3rd race, while it was yet in its state of purity, the sons of wisdom who, as will be seen, incarnated in this third race, produced by Kriyasaki, a progeny called the Sons of Od, or of the Fire Mist, the Sons of Will in Yoga, etc. They were a conscious production, as a portion of the race was already animated with the divine spark of spiritual, superior intelligence. It was not a race, this progeny. It was, at first, a wondrous being, called the Initiator, and after him, a group of semi-divine and semi-human beings, set apart, in archaic Genesis, for certain purposes. They are those in whom are said to have incarnated the highest Dhyanis, Munis, and Rishis from previous Manvantaras, to form the nursery for future human adepts on this earth and during the present cycle. These Sons of Will in Yoga, born, so to speak, in an immaculate way, remained, it is explained, entirely apart from the rest of mankind. The being just referred to, which has to remain nameless, is the tree from which in subsequent ages all the great historically known sages and hierophants, such as Rishi Kapila, Hermes, Enoch, Orpheus, etc., etc., have branched off. As objective man, he is the mysterious, to the profane, the ever-invisible, yet ever-present personage, about whom legends are rife in the East, especially among the occultists and the students of sacred science. It is he who changes form, yet remains ever the same, and it is he again who holds spiritual sway over the initiated adepts throughout the whole world. He is, as said, the nameless one, who has so many names, and yet whose names and whose very nature are unknown. He is the initiator, called the Great Sacrifice. For sitting at the threshold of light, he looks into it from the circle of darkness, which he will not cross, nor will he quit his post till the last day of this life cycle. Why does the solitary watcher remain at his self-chosen post? Why does he sit by the fountain of primeval wisdom, of which he drinks no longer, as he has naught to learn which he does not know, aye, neither on this earth nor in its heaven? Because the lonely, sore-footed pilgrims on their way back to their home are never sure to the last moment of not losing their way in this limitless desert of illusion and matter called earth life, because he would fain show the way to that region of freedom and light from which he is a voluntary exile himself, to every prisoner who has succeeded in liberating himself from the bonds of flesh and illusion. Because, in short, he has sacrificed himself for the sake of mankind, though but a few elect may profit by the great sacrifice. It is under the direct, silent guidance of this Maha, great Guru, that all of the other less divine teachers and instructors of mankind became, from the first awakening of human consciousness, the guides of early humanity. It is through these sons of God that infant humanity got its first notions of all the arts and sciences as well as of spiritual knowledge, and it is they who have laid the first foundation stone of those ancient civilizations that puzzle so sorely our modern generation of students and scholars. See the footnote. Let those who doubt this statement explain the mystery of the extraordinary knowledge possessed by the ancients, alleged to have developed from lower and animal-like savages, the cavemen of the Paleolithic age, on any other equally reasonable grounds. Let them turn to such works as those of Vitruvius Pollio of the Augustan age, on architecture, for instance, in which all the rules of proportion are those taught anciently at initiations. If he would acquaint himself with the truly divine art and understand the deep, esoteric significance hidden in every rule and law of proportion, no man, descended from a Paleolithic cave dweller, could ever evolve such a science unaided. That is an assumption, even in millenniums of thought and intellectual evolution. This is a fallacy, right? This is one of those problems that we have in history, is assuming that just because our understanding of it, right? If we go back 4,000 years. Let's not take it back to the Paleolithic, but let's take it back 4,000 years. Before we had any inkling of most of the things that we have today. To assume that because they don't have those things, that they could not have those things. Having a knowledge from which to build upon is the foundation of how we progress. Right? It is foolish to assume that because they did not have the technology that we have, that they could not have developed the technology that we have. Now, they did not have the foundation upon which we now sit. But, like I say with prophecy all of the time, right? You can only interpret prophecy through the lens of what you already know, right? To get the context. If I were to take Isaiah from the Bible and sit him right here next to me, he would not be able to explain almost anything in this room. He could tell you that this is a wall, right? He could tell you that we're in a dwelling. But he could not understand this talking rock that I'm looking at and reading this. He could not understand this camera. He could not understand this microphone. They would be a foreign concept to him. But if I were to sit here with him for a year and we didn't have the language barrier or any of that, I could teach him to operate this. I could get him to understand fundamentally what each separate part of this is in a year's time, probably less. But he had no fundamental beginning. But if he came here and I gave him the fundamentals, he could build upon them. It's not that the people back then were less clever or less intelligent. They didn't have the base upon which to build. That, again, is an important thing to bear in mind. She is intimating here that just because later they didn't have it, that they didn't have it earlier. And that is a fallacy, because it is entirely possible, not confirmed, but a speculation, that there's a 12,000-year disaster cycle. And that if that is true, that this disaster cycle does happen, right? 12,000 years ago, the earth was fundamentally changed and almost everyone died. If that is the case, and again, that is speculation, but if that is the case, then those who remained would not have enough of a foundation to build what we have here. If the same event was to happen now, and 99% of the Earth's population was to go away, which is probably what will happen, the foundation upon which we would be building would be reliant upon the individuals who survived. And so, if I survived, I have a base of knowledge that I can share and we can build upon. If somebody else does, they have a foundation of knowledge, but some people's knowledge is things like this, right? We are talking about philosophy, and we talk about hard physics sometimes. We talk about sciences sometimes. But most people are not operating on that level. Most people are operating in a very narrow scope of responsibility, right? Say you're a mechanic, right? You operate by repairing diesel engines. That is a very, very useful skill to have now, but it won't be on the other side of a reset. You will have so many things that are useful. You could probably create pumps, right? But you're probably not going to be able to create a working diesel engine on the other side of that. Nor would there even be the ability to create the diesel for that engine. Knowledge would disappear rather quickly. Now, the things that I deal with, the philosophical stuff, that's pretty easy to pass along. The stuff that the mechanic deals with, the technical clearances on a Caterpillar engine, that's not going to be very easy to pass along. There's no reason to retain that knowledge, and it would disappear. And if that is accompanied by a global destructive period by which almost everything is destroyed, which again is something that I believe, but it's purely speculation and contained in the 12,000-year disaster cycle. If everything is covered by a mud flood or something that the Tartarian people believe, or many other similar scenarios, if that wipes out all of the things we have, like all our cities are destroyed, there are no remaining structures above ground, it's going to be hard to maintain that foundational basis of knowledge. Now, this guy who understands the Caterpillar engines, he is much more important to the survival and the foundation than the people who don't operate even on that level, right? Your average office receptionist does not have a great technical understanding of anything. That's not to cast shade upon that particular profession, but they're not required to know physics, right? They're not required to know clearances for a Caterpillar engine. They're not required to know philosophy. So chances are they don't. They probably know all of the Kardashians, but that's not very handy information to have on the other side of a reset. They know how to answer a phone and to schedule things, but that's, again, is not a very handy thing to have on the other side. And so, if this guy survives, at least he's handy. If that other person's, they are handy in that they are manpower for someone who has knowledge. They are not helping to pass on knowledge. That is the problem that is being here. To assume that because they don't have, that they can't have, is a fallacy. And that's something that we need to point out. Back to the text. It is the pupils of those incarnated rishis and devas of the third root race who handed their knowledge from one generation to another, to Egypt and Greece, with its now lost canon of proportion. As it is the disciples of the initiates of the fourth, the Atlanteans, who handed it over to their Cyclopes, the sons of Cycles, or of the Infinite, from whom the name passed on to the still later generations of Gnostic priests. It is owing the divine perfection, footnote continued on the next page, of those architectural proportions that the ancients could build those wonders of all the subsequent ages. Their fanes, pyramids, cave temples, cromlechs, cairns, altars, proving that they had the powers of machinery and a knowledge of mechanics to which modern skill is like a child's play, and which that skill refers to itself as the work of 100-handed giants. Again, this is speculation, right? We do not know the mechanics by which the pyramids were built. We cannot replicate that. There are people out here that think that we can. We can't. The way that the blocks are shaped and placed, we do not have that technical skill. They are extremely well milled. They are excessively heavy. Some of those stones we cannot even move with our modern technology. And so it is entirely possible that they had a knowledge of mechanics, or that they had some other ability that we are unaware of, right? It's possible that they had magic. I believe that. They could have used sound vibrations in a way that we are unaware of in order to do that. That's a possibility. They could have had a way to manipulate the electromagnetic forces and make it resist gravity. We don't know, because we cannot replicate that. See Book of God by Kennelly. Modern architects may not altogether have neglected those rules, but they have superadded enough empirical innovations to destroy those just proportions. It is Vitruvius who gave to posterity the rules of construction of the Grecian temples erected to the immortal gods, and the 10 books of Marcus Vitruvius Pollio on architecture, of one, in short, who was an initiate, can only be studied esoterically. The Druidical circles, the dolmen, the temples of India, Egypt, and Greece, the towers, and the 127 towns in Europe which were found Cyclopean in origin by the French Institute, are all the works of initiated priest architects, the descendants of those primarily taught by the sons of God, justly called the builders. This is what appreciative posterity says of those descendants. They used neither mortar nor cement, nor steel nor iron to cut the stones with, and yet was so artfully wrought that in many places the joints are not seen, though many of the stones, as in Peru, are 18 feet thick, and in the walls of the fortress of Cusco there are stones of a still greater size. Acosto. Again, the walls of Syene, built 5,400 years ago, when that spot was exactly under the tropic, which has now ceased to be, was so constructed that at noon, at the precise moment of the solar solstice, the entire disk of the sun was seen reflected on their surface, a work which united the skill of all the astronomers of Europe would not now be able to effect. I lost where we let off. right here, and scholars. Although these matters were barely hinted at in Isis Unveiled, it will be well to remind the reader of what was said in Volume 1, pages 587 to 593, concerning a certain sacred island in Central Asia, and to refer him for further details to the chapter in Book 2 on the sons of God and the sacred island. A few more explanations, however, though thrown out in a fragmentary form, may help the student to obtain a glimpse into the present mystery. To state at least one detail concerning these mysterious sons of God in plain words, it is from them, these Brahmapaturas, that the high Dvijas, the initiated Brahmins of old, justly claimed descent, while the modern Brahmin would have the lowest caste believe literally that they issued direct from the mouth of Brahma. This is the esoteric teaching, which adds, moreover, that although these descendants, spiritually of course, from the sons of will in yoga, became in time divided into opposite sexes, as their Kriyat Sakti progenitors did themselves later on, yet even their degenerate descendants have, down to the present day, retained a veneration and respect for the creative function, and still regard it in the light of a religious ceremony, whereas the more civilized nations consider it as a more animal function. Compare the Western views and practice in these matters with the institutions of Manu in regard to the laws of Grihastha and married life. The true Brahmin is thus indeed he whose 7 forefathers have drunk the juice of the moon plant, Soma, and who is a Trisuparna, for he has understood the secret of the Vedas. And, to this day, such Brahmins know that, during its early beginnings, psychic and physical intellect being dormant and consciousness still undeveloped, the spiritual conceptions of that race were quite unconnected with its physical surroundings. That divine man dwelt in his animal, though externally human form, and, if there was instinct in him, no self-consciousness came to enlighten the darkness of the latent fifth principle. When moved by the law of evolution, the lords of wisdom infused into him the spark of consciousness. The first feeling it awoke to life and activity was a sense of solidarity, of oneness with his spiritual creators. As the child's first feeling is for his mother and nurse, so the first aspirations of the awakening consciousness in primitive man were for those whose element he felt within himself, and who yet were outside and independent of him. Devotion arose out of that feeling, and became the first and foremost motor in his nature. For it is the only one which is natural in our heart, which is innate in us, and which we find alike in human babe and the young of the animal. This feeling of irrepressible, instinctive aspiration in primitive man is beautifully, and one may say intuitionally, described by Carlyle. The great antique heart, he exclaims, how like a child's in its simplicity, like a man's in its earnest solemnity and depth. Heaven lies over him wheresoever he goes or stands on the earth, making all the earth a mystic temple to him, the earth's business all a kind of worship. Glimpses of bright creatures flash in the common sunlight, angels yet hover, doing God's messages among men. Wonder, miracle, encompass the man. He lives in an element of miracle. Footnote, that which was natural in the sight of primitive man has become only now miracle to us, and that which was to him a miracle could never be expressed in our language. A great law of duty, high as these two infinitudes, heaven and hell, dwarfing all else, annihilating all else. It was a reality, and it is one. The garment only of its dead, the essence of it lives through all times and eternity. It lives, undeniably, and has settled in all its ineradicable strength and power in the Asiatic Aryan heart, from the third race direct through its first mind-born sons, the fruits of Kriya Sakti. As time rolled on, the holy caste of initiates produced, but rarely, and from age to age, such perfect creatures, beings apart inwardly, though the same as those who produced them outwardly. while in the infancy of the third primitive race, a creature of a more exalted kind was wanting yet, and therefore designed, conscious of thought of more capricious breast, for empire formed and fit to rule the rest. It was called into being, a ready and perfect vehicle for the incarnating denizens of higher spheres, who took forthwith their abodes in these forms born of spiritual will and the natural divine power in man. It was a child of pure spirit, mentally unalloyed with any tincture of earthly element. Its physical frame alone was of time and of life, as it drew its intelligence direct from above. It was the living tree of divine wisdom, and may not therefore be likened to the more mundane tree of the Norse legend, which cannot wither and die until the last battle of life shall be fought, while its roots are gnawed all the time by the dragon Nidhogg. For even so, the first and holy son of Kuriyasakti had his body gnawed by the tooth of time, but the roots of his inner being remained forever undecaying and strong, because they grew and expanded in heaven, not on earth. He was the first of the first, and he was the seed of all the others. There were other sons of Kuriyasakti, produced by a second spiritual effort, but the first one has remained to this day the seed of divine knowledge, the one and the supreme among the terrestrial sons of wisdom. Of this subject we can say no more, except to add that in every age, aye, even in our own, there have been great intellects who have understood the problem correctly. How comes our physical body to the state of perfection it is found in now? Is it perfect? Through millions of years of evolution, of course, yet never through or from animals as taught by materialism. For, as Carlyle says, the essence of our being, the mystery in us that calls itself I, what words have we for such things? It is the breath of heaven, the highest being reveals himself in man. This body, these faculties, this life of ours, is it not all as a vesture for the unnamed? The breath of heaven, or rather, the breath of life, called in the Bible nefesh, is in every animal, in every animate speck, as in every mineral atom. But none of these has, like man, the consciousness of the nature of that highest being. Footnote. There is no nation in the world in which the feeling of devotion or of religious mysticism is more developed and prominent than in the Hindu people. See what Max Muller says of this idiosyncrasy and national feature in his works. This is direct inheritance from the primitive conscious men of the third race. This is entirely a speculation. As none has that divine harmony in its form which man possesses. It is, as Novalis said, and no one since has said it better, as repeated by Carlyle. There is but one temple in the universe, and that is the body of man. Nothing is holier than that high form. Well, that would be material. We touch heaven when we lay our hands on a human body. This sounds like a mere flourish of rhetoric, adds Carlyle, but it is not so. If well meditated, it will turn out to be a scientific fact, the expression of the actual truth of the thing. We are the miracle of miracles, the great inscrutable mystery. And that ties directly into what I call the Trinity. Body, soul, spirit. That's going to bring us to the end of this stanza. I believe this was 6. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult set of topics. I understand that I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but I do not apologize for it. I am here to try to help separate the fact and the fiction from the known and the speculative, right? It is important to maintain speculation as speculation and not to take it as fact. We can believe something and still know that it is speculation. I don't have a whole lot more to add to this one, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment if you agree or disagree with anything that I said here. Leave a comment down below, and if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If there's another work you would like to see me discuss in the manner that we are doing here, drop that in the comments as well. And if you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks. To the crew, Thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete, just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt State. Peace.